נשתה יחדיו לחיים בעיר ציון היפה ירושלים.
Shalom kulam, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight on Hillel at Home for this one-of-a-kind program, My Mizrahi Stories, an amazing panel of Mizrahi voices within the Hillel movement and in partnership with JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. I am Michael Kagan. I'm here representing the Hillel at Home team, and I'm so excited for you all to join us for this timely and amazing conversation as part of Mizrahi Heritage Month. A few quick housekeeping notes as we get started. First off, I want to introduce Andy Anderson. They'll be our tech support for tonight. So if you're noticing any audio or visual issues, feel free to message Andy directly. As well as I want to emphasize the fact that the call will be recorded tonight and available on our website, www.hillelathome.org for future viewing if you would like to see the recording. Also, as well, we will have a feedback form available at the end of the call. We hope that you'll fill this out to help us continue improving our offerings going forward. And with that now, I'm going to officially turn it over to Sapir Taib. Sapir has been working tirelessly with us to create our ongoing Mizrahi programming as part of Mizrahi Heritage Month and throughout the rest of this academic year. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sapir to give us an introduction to tonight's event and then hand it over to our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I want to first start with thank you to Hillel International, and the team that worked really hard on this event. My name is Sapir Taib. As you heard before, I work at JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. If you don't know us, we're a Jewish nonprofit based in San Francisco, California. And our mission is to raise awareness for the heritage and history of almost 1 million Jewish refugees and their descendants. Not a lot of people know the story of Jews from Arab country. So we operate through educational engagement initiative and advocacy program. We work with young professionals and students on campuses, bring in speakers. We do movie screening, Mizrahi Shabbat, and a lot of other things to raise awareness for this topic and to expose more people to the heritage and history of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. This program is actually part of November, Mizrahi Heritage Month initiative, and I want to say a few words about that, and then I will pass it to Chloe. In 2014, the government of Israel adopted a law which designated November 30th as the annual national day to commemorate 1 million Jewish refugees who were displaced from Arab countries and Iran in the 20th century. In 2015, JIMENA launched an initiative called November Mizrahi Heritage Month. So to celebrate Mizrahi heritage, not only on November 30th, which is the day that the State of Israel designated, is to celebrate it throughout the month of November. So we're doing a lot of programs and Shabbats and panels, and we're very, very happy to work with Hillel and do this program. I think it's a really important program. I'm happy to see all the people that join us. I will tell you a little bit more about my family story, but I want to pass it to Chloe to begin the conversation and the panel. Chloe Levian is a student in UCLA, and she will introduce the program and our amazing panelists today.
Thank you, Sapir. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Levian, and I'm a junior at UCLA. I am a Stand With Us campus liaison, a Hasbara fellow, and a member of Iranian American Jews for Racial Justice. I will now have each of our amazing panelists introduce themselves, starting with Yarin.
Yeah, I just realized I was muted. So thank you, everyone. I'm very glad to be here this evening. It's earlier in my side. I'm on the West Coast. My name is Yarin Shachagi, and this is my second year as an Israel Fellow at Hillel of Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. And I grew up in Maskeret Batia. It's a small town, 40 minutes out from Tel Aviv. Everybody knows of Tel Aviv, so it's easier to get at the map. I love cooking and baking, and related to this Mizrahi panel, my background is Moroccan and Iranian. My mom was born and raised in Morocco and moved to Israel when she was 8 years old. My father was born and raised in Israel, but his parents came from Iran.
And now we'll have Lior.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know that my last name must be confusing, Lior Ashkenazi Dor, but Ashkenazi is basically a Turkish last name. So for who of you who don't know it, I'm an Israel Fellow at Houston Hillel. It's my first year. I grew up in Netanya, a city in the center of Israel. And my parents, my mom was born and raised in Syria, and my father was born in Turkey. Both of them came to Israel. My father came when he was 12 years old, and my mom when she was almost 20. So she basically grew up in Syria. And thank you everyone for being here.
And now Ariana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariana Sadikov. I am born and raised in Los Angeles, and I am currently a student at Santa Monica College. My background is definitely unusual. My family is a huge mix of Mizrahi, Sephardi, and Ashkenazi. So I'm Bukharian, Turkish, Iranian, and Russian. And a lot of my ancestors were forced into apostasy. So for the longest time, they weren't able to safely identify as Jewish. And that inspired me to be a spokesperson and advocate in my own way of Jews that have this type of background. And I'm so excited to be here. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. I'd love to open up this conversation by learning more about each of you. In your own words, what does it mean to be a Mizrahi Jew?
I will start and say, first of all, it's a big question. But in general, for me, being a Mizrahi Jew is to be proud of my heritage today, which is not something that we take for granted. It's the food, it's the culture, it's the tradition. And it's said out loud that I'm Mizrahi and we came from different places. And in this Mizrahi umbrella, you have so many groups, but at the same time, I feel like my mission as a Mizrahi Jew is to say, I'm a Mizrahi.
So as Yorin said, being a Mizrahi Jew is very individual. I don't see it like a geographical definition, more like a personal one and individual one. And for me, I know that when we talk about being a Mizrahi in Israel, a lot of people talk about discrimination, things like that. I have to say that I didn't feel it so much in my family. We were born in a huge sense of pride of being Mizrahi, especially my Syrian side, a very huge feeling of longing and belonging to being Syrian and to their hometown. And also being very proud of the food, of the costumes, of the language, and also to talk a lot about the aliyah story, especially with my mom. I can say that it wasn't always like that. When I was a child, I wasn't like shouting it out loud so much as I'm today. So it was definitely a process, but in general, that's the feeling for me.
So definitely being a Mizrahi Jew is a very unique experience. And I think we as Mizrahi Jews definitely have a responsibility to be advocates of our narrative, and we are definitely responsible for making sure that our side of the story is known, because most of the time when we're talking about the Jewish narrative and the history and culture and traditions of the Jewish people, the Mizrahi side is very underrepresented. And it can be really detrimental to the Jewish narrative in general as a whole, because we play such an integral role in the story of the Jewish people. And it's pretty terrifying to see how little our information and stories are accessible to the general public, even amongst the Jewish community itself. So I think that one of the most important parts of being a Mizrahi Jew is not just the incredible food and the rich culture and history and heritage that we have, but also being advocates for that and making sure that we are known to the rest of the world.
I think Chloe is having technical issues quickly, so I'm going to help her out really quick. Let's go to the next question. Many Mizrahi Jews have a unique aliyah story that's very different from the Jews that arrived from Europe after the Holocaust. I want to hear a little bit about your personal stories, starting with Yarin again. What is unique about the way that many Mizrahi Jews first arrived in Israel?
Thank you, Michael. Of course, the stories are different. Some of them similar to, some of them are similar. Some of them you will hear something else. The main story for Mizrahi is the transit camps, which is the Ma'abarot. You can Google it. You can Google Ma'abarot, transit camp in Israel. You can see the photos and understand better and visual it in order to see what it means to be in Ma'abarot. Because it's a lot of poverty, they automatically came with a lot of expectation, okay? They came to Israel because they believe they're coming for a better place. Imagine a world without internet, without computers, that all they know is from the books, okay? This is the land of milk and honey. This is the land of everything, the Jews coming together for a better place, and then they arrive for a desert, for when they need to wait in line in order to get food. And my grandmother, this is her story. She came in her name is Tamar. She lives today in Holon. She's still alive. And she is arrived in 1949, the end of 1949, which is super hard winter in Israel. It was snow all over the country, super rare. In Haifa and Tel Aviv, you can see pictures of it. It was snow all over. And they went to Shar Aliyah. It's transit camp Ma'abara near Haifa, and they barely had something. A family of 4 people, which is pretty small for Mizrahi family. And she told me that they took the garbage can in order to use it for washing the dishes and washing the clothes and as a pot as well. So just to understand what it means to be in Ma'abara and to see that some of the people who came from Europe, not everyone, but some of them get the apartments in center of Israel, and you sent to live in a tent and you see your parents suffering from the poverty, is a really trauma for a lot of Mizrahi Jews. For my Moroccan side, it's a completely different story because they came later on in the 1970s, and they sent them automatically to a city without a lot of resources. So for them, they came from a really wealthy family in Morocco, into poverty. So I believe the expectation facing reality was something very rough and hard for many Mizrahi. But I believe from these stories, they try to grow up and being so success and being part of the Israeli story and the Jewish story today.
I think that in general, the Mizrahi Aliyah story is very different, and my family story is like even more different in the Mizrahi story. Mostly my mom's Aliyah story, for many reasons. First of all, she came very late to Israel. She came in 1984. It was, they were basically kind of the last people in Syria. So it was very unique. Also, what was unique is that they came in very small groups and it wasn't organized. They didn't have like an organized aliyah of many people, and they had Like, I think the word is like smugglers, people that their job was to help them escape from Syria. And they did it secretly, and they kind of risked their life doing it because it wasn't legal. And also what was unique is that the child kind of brought the parents. The first one to come to Israel was my mother's big brother. He came when he was 13 years old with his friends. And then my mom came with her grandmother. And just after that, all the rest of the family came, their parents and brothers. And I think that another thing that is very unique is the motives. We usually hear about people that came to Israel because they felt threatened or because they felt insecure there. And my mother's family, they don't describe it like this. They said that they were living alongside with Muslims and Christians, and they couldn't speak about Israel and about Zionism, but they didn't feel that they fear or something. They felt they had a good life there, also socially and also economically. So the main reason to come to Israel was a big connection and a sense of Zionism, but not because they felt that they were afraid. And that's something that I think that is important to say, because it's kind of different from the narrative of Jewish coming to Israel because they felt persecuted. Yeah, that's in general, I think.
So for me, contrary to what Lior just said, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. The majority of my immediate family was also born and raised, well, in the Middle East, but they didn't make aliyah. And I have a lot of extended family that did, but much earlier on in time. And the reason why they did make aliyah was because of the persecution that they were experiencing. So in other parts of Hamizrach, there were different pogroms and forms of genocide of Mizrahi Jews. And my family, the ones who were able to escape to Israel, escaped during really heavy, dangerous periods of Islamization of Jewish communities. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about the entire narrative of Mizrahi Aliyah to Israel is the fact that they're fleeing from one part of the Middle East to the other. And it's interesting that Israel is just stuck in a sandwich of other Islamic countries, and there were Jews stuck there in the diaspora, and they were moving from one end of Islamization or persecution due to anti-Semitism to Israel, which is also still facing those circumstances today. And for myself, the remainder of my ancestors and relatives that weren't able to make Aliyah were forced into apostasy, whether they ended up becoming Baha'i or Muslim. The majority of them ended up becoming Muslim or secular. But this was a very legitimate reality for Mizrahi Jews between the 17 to 1900s. And yeah, I think it's incredible that there were so many Jews of Mizrahi descent that had so many different individual experiences where they were from. And like Lior mentioned, some people were comfortable where they were from and made Aliyah based on their own decision to be proud Jews living in our homeland, or it was because they didn't have a choice.
This question is for everyone who wants to answer it. How has the conversation of being Mizrahi shifted throughout your life?
I would love to answer this question. So I feel that this conversation was the conversation that I did with myself was changed a lot during my life, because as a child, in general, Syrian Jews in Israel aren't like a very big community. So when you say you are like Moroccan or I don't know, Yemen or things like that, it's something that people know more and they know what you're talking about. But when you said that you are a Syrian Jew, is kind of not so common. And sometimes older children, they had like a problem understanding why my mom has that accent, and why when they call my house and she's answering, it sounds like an Arabic person is talking. And of course, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing or something, but it was hard to understand sometimes. And explaining that, like I said, the last name that is Ashkenazi and the accent of my mom's accent, things like that. So sometimes I can say even that I was kind of ashamed of it and I didn't want to talk about it a lot. And as I grew up, I understood that it's a privilege and it's not something that I should hide or something. And I started to talk a lot more about my mom and my father, and about my mom's aliyah story, and about our food and traditions. And I really wanted to make up for these years. And I took an Arabic class in college, and I did everything that I can to tell the world her story, because I kind of felt that that it wasn't okay. So yeah, I can say that it shifted a lot through the years, and now I'm glad that I'm here and I can share the story. So yes.
Great. I will share too. I would love to answer the question. For me, my mom, I told you, was born and raised in Morocco, so she spoke Moroccan Arabic, which is a bit different than Arabic. But she didn't learn. I don't know the language. I don't know if she keep the language to herself in order to gossip with her sister, or maybe because it's a thing, to teach her kids. But anyway, I don't know it. But for me, it was growing up, of course, she's Moroccan, she speaks the language. We celebrate Mimuna, which is the celebration of Moroccan Jews by the end of Passover, and many traditions. I went to shul, so the shul is for Moroccan Jews with specific melody and specific prayer. So for me, the Moroccan was very present all of my life. Actually, when I went to university, that was the time I was starting to question myself, should I be so much proud? Because I learned so much. I learned Jewish history, and I learned so much about discrimination. I saw that all my professors and all my teachers and all the people in the key positions are Ashkenazi. So I was starting reflecting on myself about my identity and what it means that I'm here, and what it means for my grandparents and for my mom to experience being Moroccan 20, 30, 40 years ago. So this is from the Moroccan side. From the Iranian side, I actually was not really living it, maybe because my father, maybe because of myself. But when I started learning about the Jewish history and about the Mabarot and the history of the Jewish Mizrahi, I was like, why are you reading from the history books? Go to your grandparents, go ask them. So thank God I was waking up 2 years ago and started asking my grandparents who passed away a year ago. I was like, tell me your story. And I went to my grandma, tell me your story. And I really encourage you to do it. Go to your grandparents and ask for the story, because this is your story. So don't miss it.
As somebody that wasn't raised actually identifying as Jewish, my family, obviously because of the traumatic background that they had, kept it very hush-hush, and we didn't grow up identifying that way. So as I got older and I questioned my roots and my heritage and started finding more Jewish tidbits in my life, like paperwork and pointing out different forms of observance, whether it was kashrut or Shabbat, I felt connected to it in a way that I didn't think I would have felt. And as I started developing a relationship with my Jewish identity more and more, I began to understand the differences between someone who's Ashkenazi and Sephardi or Mizrahi. And this relationship that I developed with my Mizrahi heritage was like nothing I ever could have expected, because you play such a unique role in the Jewish community as someone who has Mizrahi background, because we're growing up, at least here in the United States in the diaspora, in a place where Judaism is very, for lack of better words, Ashkenormative. You grow up and you see most of the restaurants are Ashkenazi style restaurants. The way that Hanukkah or Yom Kippur or anything else is celebrated is usually celebrated in an Ashkenazi style. And you grow up, as Yareen mentioned, with this very interesting duality of knowing that this doesn't really feel familiar to me, but it's like the only thing accessible to me. Even here in Los Angeles, where I'm from, where there is a big Sephardic and Mizrahi community, most of observant or traditional Jewish life happens in a very Ashkenaz fashion. So when you're developing your relationship to yourself as a Mizrahi Jew, having to internalize all these things and watching it shift, like, do I, participate and kind of assimilate into Ashkenazi Jewry, which is like a huge factor in my community, or do I stand out and, be celebratory of my heritage, even though that kind of puts you in a different place where a lot of the religious schools, for example, are Ashkenaz, and a lot of the community events and stuff that happen here are done in an Ashkenazi fashion. So for me, as I got older, I chose to, more than anything, embrace my Mizrahi side. And that's something I was timid about in the beginning. So that shifted for me, and I'm proud of my decision, and I'm happy that it was possible to be able to embrace my Mizrahi Jewry, and that it's acceptable here, at least still.
Thank you. Yarin, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings when it comes to how the Mizrahi community is viewed in the United States. What are some things that American Jews should know to be real allies to the Mizrahi community?
I think that a lot of someone mentioned it in the chat, that the history we tell in Israel is a lot about the Ashkenazi Jews, and I think it's time to open the door for the Mizrahi story as well. Not I think that we need to learn about the Ashkenazi story, it's very important, but not to deny or forget or ignore the Mizrahi story. And I think it's very important as well here in the Jewish community in North America that, okay, here the majority probably is Ashkenazi Jew, but we all one people. I mean, we have so many stories, not just the Mizrahi, the Ethiopian, the other communities all over the world that have a story they want to share. Everybody wants to share their story. So I think we need to know how to divide the cake better in order to give space to all these groups if we want to be open to everybody. And I think that the Jewish community here needs to know that this is a really rich history and rich culture with a lot of great things. So don't miss it, and start open the books, or ask your neighbors or your friends and learn about it.
Based on what you have all said so far, why do you think it's important to recognize Mizrahi Heritage Month, especially in the US?
Sorry, Chloe, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Based on what you have all said so far, why do you think it's important to recognize Mizrahi Heritage Month, especially in the United States?
I feel that it's important because, especially because it's very important to talk about the diversity. I think that we can talk about Mizrahi Jews as one definition to everyone. As Yarin said, every origin have their unique traditions, culture, food, history, and it's very important to learn about the diversity. And I don't think that we should, it's important to have a month that talks about it, but I think that it's important to hear and learn about it all the time and not just in this specific month. Yeah, so as Yorin said, just sit with your family, ask them to talk about what they've been through and their history. Yes.
I can also add that I think Mizrahi Commemoration Month and Mizrahi Commemoration Day in the United States is a really unique window into insides of the Jewish narrative that aren't normally discussed and are misrepresented. And we have, to touch on what Lior and Yurin also brought up, there's no, like we have this spectrum of Mizrahi Jews, whether it's like from Yemen to Morocco, Iran, Tunisia, Libya, all these countries that have such rich heritage. There's just no better way to showcase that by like dedicating a month or a day to acknowledging the importance of the fact that this part of the story isn't being represented enough, not nearly as much as it should be. And when we look at like Common Core education in the United States and other parts of the world, the country here, this is not mentioned anywhere. I mean, I remember that I didn't even know what a Sephardi or Mizrahi Jew was until I found out I was one. And this is probably an experience that a lot of people have where they don't understand that, yeah, you're Jewish, but there's something very unique about belonging to the Mizrahi community, because it's not your standard Jewish narrative. And I think it's really incredible that we have the opportunity by dedicating a month and a day to celebrating and advocating for the stories and the heritage and culture of Mizrahi Jews.
I would just add a little bit to that. First of all, I think it's a great month, and Sapir from JIMENA every year doing a great job doing events and everything related to Mizrahi Jews. So thank you for that. But I will mention that also it's not just the story of the history and the culture that we all mentioned, it's very important, but it's also the story of the people who, most of them, experience of being refugees. And Israel came and, was the shelter for them to accept them. And even in Israel, it was a whole different story. So I think to know all this story and all these points throughout the Mizrahi story, it's very important in order to understand better the Israeli culture and the Jewish people in general, the story of it.
Thank you all. My next question is, what are some ways that the American Jewish community can show support for the Mizrahi community?
I personally think that one of the best ways is to kind of like open the stage for Mizrahi Jews to show up and advocate for their side of the story. One of the most amazing parts of my experience as a JIMENA Young Professional Board member is being able to watch these types of events happen or participating in them myself, and being able to view the reactions that we get from people that aren't as aware about the Mizrahi side of the narrative, and seeing whether it's Jews or non-Jews come to that place of enlightenment to be like, wow, I didn't know that Jews were so diverse, or I didn't know that Jews had such an interesting history that no one ever talks about. Not that there's anything not interesting about Ashkenazi heritage or history at all. But I think the lack of representation of Mizrahi Jewish history and culture is something that makes us stand out even more as a part of the Jewish people. And having the opportunity to be involved and speak out about it is one of the best things that can be done to continue accurately portraying the Jewish narrative as a whole. Mizrahi voices just have to be more included, because if they're not, our heritage is being drowned out, our voices are being drowned out, and a huge part of the Jewish narrative is just completely left missing.
I will say that basically to continue what you said a minute ago, that just to give the stage in order to share the story. I know my Hillel in Silicon Valley doing it in a great way. We have Mizrahi Week every year, and I went to a few leadership fellowship in many Hillels. So that's a great way to expose the students and expose the American people, the Jewish community here, to the Mizrahi story. And basically just give the stage, people willing to speak, people willing to talk, and we are plenty all over. So we're here to share our story.
We will now open up to Q&A. Our first question comes from Shirley Mizrahi. You can now unmute yourself.
Okay, great. I wasn't expecting to that, so just a second, because I need to read my question. But I think I just tried to ask, what do you think are like the biggest differences between Ashkenazis and Mizrahis today in Israel? And what do we need to do, or what should happen in order to like bridge these gaps?
I think there are many differences, especially I grew up in an Orthodox environment, so the differences were mainly like in prayers. We have like different prayers to Mizrahi Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, and they pray in different synagogues and things like that. I think that it's part of something that sometimes can create a gap, although each, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, they have like different heritage. So each one of them want to maintain their like way of practicing their religious. But I think that's something that sometimes can create a difference. Also, the differences can be expressed in different food, different like culture and practices. I'm trying to think about ways to make the gap like smaller. I feel like with the years, it's not like it's getting kind of better, but I think that there's still a way to go to try to make them more less separate from each other. Yeah.
In my opinion, I think we have a great tool in our hands called education. I believe that from very early age, we can start with, like, putting a lot of resources and effort in education in order to close the gap, especially integration, which was actually a plan in Israel in the late 60s, early 70s, which a lot of people will say it's a big fail. I don't really agree, because we do have integration in Israel between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi. But I agree that there is a gap to close. I think a lot of Mizrahi Jews, because the history are living in the periphery in Israel. So I believe that the state need more funds and resources to the periphery, schools and other places in order to give these kids more opportunities so they will be able, when they mature, to give a better job and with that closing the gap.
I think one of the best ways to bridge the gap is to find a way, like Yareen mentioned, education is really important. So to find a way to better integrate the Mizrahi side into general Jewish education and regular education would be really helpful to better promote our side of the story, because most of the time, what we're doing is partaking in Jewish societies that have been structured, again, as I mentioned earlier, in an Ashkenazi fashion. And we learn a lot of things about Ashkenazi culture and heritage and history, and very little about Sephardic and Mizrahi history. And it's truly a shame. And I don't think there's anyone or anything particularly at fault for that, but I think it's a lack of advocacy on our behalf that has led society to kind of be structured this way. And if the one thing I think would really contribute is if we continue to stand up and say, hey, don't forget about us, we have to be included in the narrative as well because we're a huge part of it. And the more that we do that, I think the more we'll have success in bridging that gap, so we are more unified as the Jewish people.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Chaim Cohen. You can now unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Chloe. I want to say thanks everyone for organizing this. During this talk, a lot of talk was going on about, I understand, the threat of Mizrahi Jews vanishing into obscurity if stories are not told, and that makes sense. I also, during the talk, was hearing some things about marginalization of Mizrahi Jews, and I was wondering, are there similarities or differences in the marginalization of Mizrahi Jews versus general anti-Semitism? Does that make sense?
I will try to answer that. Thank you for the question. I believe that you can find similarity when you have discrimination against group, like you have stereotypes and specific opinions that people have on specific groups. So it could be that what the Ashkenazi or people in Israel feel about the Mizrahi Jews, or what people who are not Jewish thinking about the Jewish people, which is in a bad way, which is anti-Semitism. I think it's very hard to try to compare between the two, because this is like anti-Semitism is a hate against specific group. I think in Israel, the discrimination is more trying to because of like the agenda of the early 50s in Israel was to try to get to everyone one culture in order to build a nation, which is a really hard task. And we can blame it from our eyes now, but back then they just trying to make everyone the same in order to have a nation and have a people. So from that we experienced this discrimination. Anti-Semitism is a completely different story and has a very long history. It's a very good question to think about. We can leave it open and think about it, but thank you for that.
Our next question comes from Shimi Mizrahi. You can now unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, well, you asked that question before I wrote it, the serious one. So I'll ask the second one, if you can share your favorite Mizrahi costume.
That's definitely tough to choose from. For myself, I would have to say I find personally it really, really beautiful how Mizrahi Jews speak Hebrew and pray. I think the way that we pronounce Hebrew is very different and it sounds like almost Arabic, like Judeo-Arabic. And like when I go to Beit Knesset and I'm in a Sephardic or Mizrahi environment, I can connect to that so much more. Just the way that certain words are pronounced and davening happens, that's something for me that I always reflect upon as a privilege to experience as a Mizrahi Jew, because I think it's really beautiful and like it just takes me back to being like at the Beit HaMikdash. That's what it makes me think of.
I will say Kuftan. I'm Moroccan. As I mentioned, we are celebrating every year Mimuna, and part of the tradition. Someone mentioned in the church also Khina. We like to wear. I'm the Moroccan Khina. We like to wear Kuftan. You have the one for each gender, but you can play with it as much as you like. And yeah, in the Mimuna, in a few months from now, we're gonna wear it. You're gonna see it.
My mom's side has a costume that I believe that it's very unique. I don't know if other Mizrahi Jews are used to do it, but when a child has his first teeth coming up, so we do like a huge celebration of all the family and everyone is gathering together and like bringing presents and things. So it's kind of unique because it's not celebrating like a birthday, it's celebrating the first teeth. So yeah.
I will also answer that question. Dayenu is a Persian Jewish tradition, and there's something about hitting your family members with onions that is always the highlight of a Passover Seder. Our next question comes from Bar Cohen. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making this happen. My question comes from my personal experience, I guess. I grew up religious and I went to religious schools. And I wanted to know, what do you think, why Judaism as a religion, instead of uniting us as Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, it's causing to like increasing the gap?
Can you repeat it, Bar, please? Sorry.
Yeah. Why Judaism as a religion, instead of uniting us, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi Jews, it's causing to increase the gap?
I'm recent about Tshuva, so I became religious about, it's been like 3 years now. And most of the religious institutions in my community are Ashkenaz, and there are lots of problems here between rabbis and Batei Din about stuff that's going on. So I think as Jews, intrinsically, we like to question and argue and always like fight for the right answer and prove our points. And it's definitely hard when we have such different traditions, so many different minhags that are very individual to each community, it can, the differences that we have based on our heritage and our own cultures can cause a huge gap. And I think that most of the time in more religious environments, instead of focusing on the uniting factors, such as, we're all religious because we love Hashem, we love Torah, and we love Am Yisrael, and we want to be connected as a nation, we get caught up in semantics and differences in practices, whether we should use foil for Pesach or something else, or you have to follow certain customs that are deemed by this rabbi or that rabbi, and we end up losing sight of what's most important, which is following the Torah and loving Hashem and every other Jew in religious circles. And I think the best way to bridge the gap is to, in every way, always encourage focusing on the main thing that we're all here for, which is, just being good Jews, being good people, and not being judgmental or critical of others for their different cultural practices that can definitely cause a huge bridge between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi Jews.
Our last question comes from Chloe Laverson. You can now unmute yourself.
Hi, y'all. In America, I feel like we talk a lot about Jews of color, rightfully so, but don't talk enough about Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. Do you feel like our community is left out of this important discussion when it comes to JOC?
I would say absolutely. I've personally had a conflicting relationship with the term Jews of color, because at the end of the day, all Jews are indigenous to Judea, which is in the Middle East. And but I understand the intent behind that term. And there's definitely a huge, very, very tragic misrepresentation of Mizrahi Jews, even in the pro-Israel and pro-Jewish advocacy communities, where we are trying to advocate for Jewish rights and Jewish history, heritage. And it's unfortunate. And I think that one person mentioning one little fact about Mizrahi representation is all that it takes to start a chain of information transmitted throughout the entire community. And I think that's what's awesome about the Jewish world, is that someone can post something or share something or make a comment here, and another person will pick that up, and it'll get circulated into the media that we share with each other. And I think that that's a great question, and the Mizrahi community is responsible for making sure that we're addressing issues that affect us like that.
I will add to that yes, definitely. I met a lot of people here that thought that are thinking that Israel is definitely 100% white people, and I have heard it like several times, and they facing me, and I'm like, do I look white? I mean, this is something we need to include the Mizrahi. I mean, we like to call it the Mizrahi Sephardi group, but not under the umbrella of Jews of color. And we need to ask why, because this is part of the rainbow, right? I mean, we are part of a really big story. And I think that, as we mentioned throughout all this session, that more people need to know the story. There is a lack of representative from the Mizrahi community, especially here in North America. And I think that totally we need to be part of the story, part of the narrative. And yeah, I said it over and over again. Just invite us to be part of things, and we are coming.
Thank you all for your questions. I will now hand it back to Michael.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for that amazing conversation with all of our remarkable panelists. Thank you so much, Yarin, to Lior, to Ariana, for everything you've done to elevate this conversation in the Mizrahi community. I'm going to hand it over quickly to Sapir again, who's going to share a little bit about some more upcoming programs that JIMENA is hosting, both in partnership with us and also some unique ones that they're going to be hosting. And then from there, we'll officially wrap up today's conversation. So Sapir, take it away.
Thank you. First, I want to thank our amazing moderators and panelists. This was a really great conversation. I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed hearing your perspective and your personal stories. I'll share a little bit about my family and then about what is coming up. And just to refer to the previous question about Jews of color, some Mizrahi Jews in America identify as part of the chat is jumping into the screen as Jews of color, but some just say like we're not part of the Jews of color community and we want to identify as Mizrahi Jew. There's no right or wrong. That's definitely up to you how you identify. Some people just say, you know, Jews of color are Jews that are not white, and we're definitely not white, so we're part of this group. And some not. So I don't think people feel like they're left out. If they want to be identified as they can, and no one's going to tell them anything. But you're right in a sense that when people talk about Jews of color, they often not talk about Mizrahim and the Mizrahi story. That is definitely right. So we'll share a little bit about my family. My mom's side of the family, her last name is Haddad. They immigrated from Tunisia to Israel in 1964, and they built a house in southern Israel in Moshav Eitan. And my dad side of the family, last name Taib and Jerby, were first out of Tripoli in 1950. They arrived in Israel and they stayed in the Ma'abarot. Yarin mentioned the Ma'abarot at the beginning. It's a temporary immigration camp in Israel that they built in the 50s because they just didn't have enough houses for all the new Olim that came to Israel. I think the population in Israel in the first year increased in like 30%, so they just didn't have a place for everyone. So my family stayed there for 8 years. They came with 2 kids and 2 suitcases. And after 8 years, they moved to Bnei Brak, which is central of Israel. Today, all of my family lives in Israel. I'm Israeli myself, and half of the population in Israel is Mizrahi. So I think the story of Mizrahi Jews is much more known in Israel and maybe less known here. And it's very important to do this type of program. I want to say thank you again to Hillel that provided this platform to do this very important session. We did a preparation call, and I said that the way to combat anti-Semitism, in my opinion, is with education. And when people learn that not all Jews are white, they have a better understanding of the Jewish story, and they're more likely, to understand us more. And if we raise awareness for different groups within our community, that's going to help. So I want to thank again to everyone who participated and organized and upcoming events. So I don't remember all of them because we have so many this month, but I think on November 30th, we have the day of November 30th, we have 2 really important programs, one in partnership with Israeli Council in LA and San Francisco, and Hillel International, and many other organizations. I highly recommend you to join. We have great speakers and a special performance live from Israel with Ta'ir from AWA. So that's going to be on November 30th, 2 p.m. Pacific time. And if you want to join more programs, most of our programs are for young professional students, but they're open to all. Check our website, JIMENA.org, and we have a JIMENA online page there. And all our upcoming events are there, but definitely join November 30th. That's like the biggest event. Hillel is going to be there with us, and I hope everyone can join us.
Thank you so much, Sapir. And with that, we're officially
and
gonna
last thing.
Go for it. You all good.
I know we're a little bit over the time, but Yarin made an amazing virtual exhibition about Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. It's too humble, so he didn't mention that during this session. But check it out. I know we can't do in person and go to museum, but you can definitely go virtually. Yarin, maybe you could put the link in the chat if possible, and people you can feel like you're walking into Mizrahi and Sephardic Heritage Museum, see pictures and learn more about Jews from Arab countries.
Thank you so much again. This was an amazing conversation with you all. I keep getting blasted with this, so I do also want to give a mazal tov to Denny Avdija, who just got drafted to the Washington Wizards, which is really exciting. The most successful Israeli prospect to ever hit the NBA. And with that, thank you all so much for joining. This was an amazing conversation. We hope you'll continue to support us all throughout our ongoing programming this year, including JIMENA. So with that, Laila Tov, have an amazing rest of your night, and we hope to see you on here soon. Thank you all again.
Thank you.